Danielle DeMarco's our real estate investment mortgage broker. We've been working with her for as long as we've been in the business. She knows everything there is to know about real estate investment mortgages. She helps our clients in so many ways. Not just putting a mortgage on one of their properties, but she develops a real estate investment plan. So if you want to acquire 3 properties, she'll lay out a plan to get you there and get the proper financing on property number 1, number 2, number 3. And she does it all within a way so that's comfortable with you and you do meet your goals. So Danielle, why don't you take it away?
Thanks for the amazing intro, Tim. I appreciate it. It's definitely been a long time we've been working together now, but I love it. So that's a good thing. If you could go to the next slide for me, please. Okay, so today, as Tim and Azad mentioned, we kind of want to touch on refinancing. So this is for any of you that already own a property and are existing homeowners. One thing they did touch on, who you mortgage with matters. It is important. Tim, Azad, myself, we're all aligned. We communicate, we come up with plans together, we work on those plans, we execute those plans all together cohesively. So yes, there are other mortgage brokers out there, there's banks out there, but the difference between how we operate is, like Tim said, we're looking to accumulate multiple properties ideally. What that means sometimes is going back and revisiting existing mortgages that have already been done. Were they set up properly? Should we adjust them? Should we make changes? How did those mortgages affect our future qualifying? As well, if you're trying to accumulate multiple properties, kind of laying it out and saying, okay, for property number 1, which lender should we be going to and why? How should we set it up to accumulate property 2? And then same thing for property 2 to accumulate property 3. So we're always looking ahead multiple purchases, if that's what your goal is, instead of focusing on the single transaction, which is what a lot of mortgage brokers do and banks. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so what is refinancing? We hear the word equity takeout, we hear refinancing, we hear debt consolidation, we hear all of these things. So refinancing really encompasses all of that. It's where you're taking your existing property that you already own. You have equity in that property. That equity is your own money, your own asset. So we can refinance, pull that equity out. What we do with that equity, we can pay down debt. We can use it for down payment on additional properties. We can JV with somebody. We can do multiple things. We can do improvements. We can legalize suites on existing properties we already have. So we can use that money basically for whatever you want. Extending amortizations is another part of refinancing. Sometimes if there isn't enough equity in there, we might refinance just to extend that out so that we can lower payments down and qualify for more properties. Changing mortgage terms, same thing. Maybe mortgage rates are changing or we want to switch to a variable because we need more flexibility. We can adjust the terms of your mortgage when we refinance. And debt pay down. So part of this is obviously cash flow on a monthly basis. Just as you as a homeowner, you accumulate debt, obviously that's monthly payments that you're making. But when we're going to qualify for additional properties, all the debt that you do have obviously affects what you can spend on the next property. So sometimes we'll consolidate debt and use some of your refinance proceeds to get that debt paid out so that we can then qualify to purchase the next property. To give you an example, we got a client right now who has a car lease. It's tough to pay out car leases. There's usually fees or residual buyout amounts. But in this case, when you do the math, it made sense to pay out the car lease and the fee and the residual in order to accumulate additional properties, because a debt is a debt. You're paying interest on it anyways. It's a depreciating asset. Whereas if you can pay it off and still have funds left over from a refinance, use it for a down payment on additional properties. Well, now you're building wealth and you're having someone else pay down a mortgage on a property. So that's building equity. Someone else is paying down the debt, covering the interest costs. Interest costs on rentals can be write-offs. That's where the accountant comes in. Tim and Azad have an amazing accountant that they can refer to you. So we look at all of this, the overall picture, to say, okay, if we're refinancing, how should we structure it? What should we pay off? What's going to be best for you? And then a big one is lowering payments, because obviously lowering payments helps us qualify and again, helps with cash flow. So that's kind of the overview of refinancing. Next slide, please, Tim. Okay, so first example is reducing debt. So this again, has multiple reasons that we would do this, but let's just take an example here. So if you have a house value of 500,000, your current mortgage is 1850 a month, there might be a penalty and a legal fee, you owe a credit card, another credit card, and maybe a personal loan or a car loan. So outgoing, you're about 3550 a month. In new financing, if we were to refinance, we could refinance up to 20% or up to 80%. So we could technically go to 400,000. In this case, I'm using the example just to pay out debt. So we're consolidating the 330, which is what they owe in total. The new payment goes down to 1985 a month. So you can see that's 1565 a month of savings. If we were to be purchasing additional property, we might take that mortgage rate to 400,000 to take out some equity for down payment as well. But you can see that $1,500 a month difference, that's an entire mortgage payment. So now we can qualify for additional properties. Plus, you as a homeowner putting out cash every single month, you're saving yourself $1,500 a month out of pocket. So it helps twofold. It helps with your cash flow. It helps with your outgoing monthly budget, and it helps us qualify to accumulate additional properties. So in this case, this is an example on why we would do it to reduce debt. And these are actual numbers. So we see savings like this all the time. I think the most I've saved somebody is like $3,800 a month in outgoing payments because we were able to have enough equity in the property to consolidate some really high payments that they had outside of the mortgage. So it can be really, really beneficial and really help us qualify. Next slide, Tim. Okay, so refinancing to qualify. So if we, again, just taking the same mortgage balances so we can compare apples to apples. If we kept our mortgage the same on our current home and didn't refinance and consolidate that debt, that home buyer could purchase a $200,000 price. That's it. If we redo the mortgage, that $200,000 went up to $350,000. So that's $150,000 more of purchasing power just by refinancing and consolidating debt. That's it. So you can see how on a new property, you know, let's say it was a $300,000 or $400,000 that they could qualify, you add 150, now it's 550,000. This is the difference between a condo and a townhouse and a single family home and a suited property. So by going back and revisiting existing mortgages, we're actually able to better set you up to help you qualify to purchase more properties. And next slide, Tim. Okay, so this is refinancing for profit. So this is where we're talking about that cash flow. So again, let's say you're coming up for mortgage renewal, you have a $275,000 balance, your amortization is 15 years. There's your current payment, obviously using old rates. I wish we had those rates now. Starting amortization was at 25 years. You're getting $1,750 a month of rent. So right now you're cash flowing. But when you come up for renewal and you have to put that $275,000 balance over 15 years at today's rates, you are now no longer cash flowing. That payment is going up to at least $2,300 a month. So now you're negative cash flowing. In a new financial situation, 609. So here I want to touch on this. This exact slide, I didn't touch up from the last time I did this presentation. Rates right now on this same product on the new financial situation are now around 464, slightly lower. We were at 609 when I did this. So as you can imagine, even just in the last year and a couple months, rates have come down significantly. So when you are hearing about interest rates right now, you might be thinking they're high because we had those, 1, 2, 3% for so long. But if you look at people who purchased even just a year ago, rates are down significantly. Sorry, that was just a little sidebar. So if you take that new mortgage of 275 and all we do is extend out the amortization. So this is just to show you an example of how redoing your mortgage without even taking out $1, just extending your amortization out can help you with cash flow. So put it out over 30 years. Keeping in mind, some people hear 30 years and you kind of panic a little bit thinking, I don't want to have a mortgage for 30 years. But the bottom line is interest is a write-off on a rental. Typically, when we do long-term holds, the goal is not necessarily to pay your mortgage off as fast as possible. It is more so to cash flow and qualify for additional properties. You're going to let your tenants pay down that mortgage over time. You don't have to stress about that. So extending out to 30 years is fine. You might sell that property in 20 years and use the equity and retire. You might hold on to the property. And as you go, obviously the payments get lower and lower, the lower your mortgage balance is, and we can keep extending out. So new rate, new payment, 1652, rental income, 1750. So now you can see you're back in the positive. So that's a $600 a month difference approximately just by extending out an amortization and not doing anything else on a mortgage. So you can see why we do this, because again, that helps with qualifying, but it also helps you profit every single month. Instead of being in the red, you know, $600 a month, you're now in the green. And next slide. Okay, that's it. I was supposed to do like 10 minutes or so, so I think I'm kind of on time, I hope.
Yeah, that was great, Danielle.
Perfect. So yeah, those are kind of the different reasons that we would look at refinancing.
There's a question in there. Can you extend every 5 years?
So you can actually extend at any time with a penalty, or you can wait until your maturity date with no penalty. So it really is going to depend. Right now, and the last, I would say 2 years, we've seen a lot of people break their mortgages because property values are so high. So the higher the property value is, the more equity you can pull out. So for anybody that's refinancing to pull out a down payment or refinancing to pay off debt, you know, when the higher the property value, you can go up to 80% of whatever it is. So that gets you basically more cash out. So we see a lot of people break their mortgages before the end of the term to refinance, whether it's for taking out equity, extending amortizations. Same thing. If you're going to buy a property, but you're trying to wait until your maturity date on your existing property to avoid a penalty, you might save a little bit on the penalty on the refinance side of things, but what if the market shifts and now all of a sudden you're paying more for the property or rates have gone up? So it's not something that I say you need to wait until the end of your term to do. We can definitely look and see if it makes sense midterm.
And Danielle, what are people choosing these days between fixed and variable? What are they doing? Because it's a tough decision.
It is. A lot of it comes down to qualifying. So again, if we think about it, if you're refinancing an existing home and the goal is to purchase another one, so we're doing it, you know, to help qualify, in that case, taking a variable rate mortgage, the variable is still significantly higher than the fixed. So your payment on that property you're refinancing is going to be higher if you take a variable. So it gives you flexibility and allows you to watch rates potentially come down and lock in eventually, but it might affect your qualifying in the interim. So it's going to depend on each client what we're doing the refinance for or the purchase for. Obviously, with the variable being higher too, it's harder to qualify. So if we're trying to max out our qualifying, we would maybe go with a lower fixed rate to help us qualify. But if somebody has a lot of room in their debt ratios and their qualifying ratios, then we might look more at a variable because we have the room, we have the flexibility, and we can still qualify for the next property. So that's what we were talking about earlier, is not focusing on the single one transaction, but making sure that we're setting you up for success for future transactions. Because if I said to my clients, oh yeah, take a variable all the time on their refinances, well, then that might affect quite significantly what they can do on the next purchase. So then you kind of weigh out, you know, what do you prefer, the fixed or the variable? You can spend more on the next house or spend less. So that's conversations we have.
Okay, another question from Dan, Caitlin's Dan. Hey Danielle, can you explain the difference between refinancing and second mortgages on a property, if any?
Yeah. Hi, Dan. How are you? Yeah, for sure. So refinancing and adding a second mortgage, they're
Missed a few questions.
Oh,
Sorry, Karen, go on.
okay, sorry. They're essentially this, like the same thing, but slightly different because they're still refinancing. So you're still accessing the equity in your home. There are some lenders that, let's use this as an example, you have a 2.39% interest rate. Maybe it doesn't make sense to break that mortgage when you're jumping up to 4.5%. Maybe it does. But there's some lenders out there that will do multiple components. And so I just want to clarify, Dan, as well, different components versus second mortgages. So what I'm talking about right now is a second component. So just to give you an example, like a Scotiabank, you can refinance your property, leave your existing mortgage exactly as it is, no penalty, keep the lower rate, and then add on a second component for the new money you need at today's rates over a 30-year amortization. The benefit of that is obviously you keep the lower rate on the existing mortgage. The drawback is that your payments are going to be higher because we're not taking all of the money and extending it all out over 30 years. So that's another conversation we have, which is what is most important? Do we need to extend the whole thing out over 30 years to qualify, or can we still qualify for another property, keeping two separate components to save you on the penalty and give you the benefit of the lower rate? Now, if we were having higher rates and coming down, then it would be a different conversation. As far as a second mortgage itself goes, that would be where, in our language, a second mortgage is, for example, going to a B lender or a private lender and adding on a second mortgage. So that's where we leave your existing the way it is, but maybe we access it through not a second component, but an entirely different mortgage through a different lender at higher interest rates. So again, it's situational. We tend not to do those because they don't really help with qualifying and they don't really help with cash flow. So we would do the math in that case to decide, okay, is it better to just refinance and incur the penalty, or is it better to do a second mortgage? And it depends. Sometimes people who have a lot of debt, it makes sense to do a second mortgage, but most times we would look at a second component if a lender offers that, which is also something we look at when we're planning long-term for your mortgage. Which lenders are we going to and why? There's a couple trust companies out there and a couple banks that allow second components, whereas there's others that don't. And so depending on our strategy and what we need to do, we might access one of those lenders that allows a second component, or we might hold off on that one for a different property. So it's a little bit crazy. There's a lot that goes on in our heads as mortgage brokers when we're trying to figure out the best situation for you. And it's always moving, and it's a variable plan that we come up with as well, because maybe you find a different type of property than you were initially looking for, and so then we have to adjust our strategy. But yeah, that's kind of the difference between refinancing a whole first mortgage, refinancing and adding on a second component, or refinancing and doing an entirely separate second mortgage.
Awesome. Awesome. Just another quick question. Are you doing commercial mortgages, Danielle?
Yeah, we do commercial. Tim and Azad also do commercial. So yes.
Yeah, we're all licensed with commercial, which is great. And just to quickly explain, Danielle did mention we're working with the client right now that she actually refinanced their home and they wanted to go purchase a bigger home. And during this whole process, they did have a BMW lease payment that they had to buy out. And we actually walked away from this property. And the buyout was significant. It was a good amount. I have to get permission of our investor to share this. We'll do a video with him, Tim. But in the end, we worked out the value of the deal we're getting in Evergreen. And to build this same property, it's a 1,700 square foot home in Evergreen. It's under conditions right now. Tomorrow is condition day. And we actually walked him through the process. So this family started working with us just recently, signed up to Crew Investing just in the last month, and moved very quickly with Danielle to get the money out of their home. And their focus before they met us was Danielle actually to pay off their mortgage. They didn't have much of a mortgage at all. And then we showed them the benefits of taking that equity out, which Danielle went through the whole process. Small hiccup with the lease payment, getting out of the lease payment. And Danielle, we had to pay off that BMW because we needed the borrowing capacity to buy the bigger home in Evergreen. And the value of this home in Evergreen, getting back to it, building the same product was roughly $300,000 to maybe $500,000 more to build this same property. And our clients are in IT, and this guy really runs his numbers and goes through every line, every item. And in the end, he decided to go for it and buy the bigger home and pay out the BMW. So what I'm trying to tell you, we've had to go through this before, Tim. We've had to tell one guy to sell his Land Rover. There's a video on that. He had to sell his Land Rover for us to move him forward. So sometimes those lease payments can get in the way, and you have to sort them out. So sometimes it's better getting the real estate first, or what Danielle always tells her clients, during the conditional period and closing, please don't go and do anything with any leases out there or big ticket items, because it can weigh into closing on the property.
Exactly.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Danielle. I mean, the next step is for you people out there that are thinking of refinancing would be to get in contact with Danielle. Her email is there. As we've said, we've worked with Danielle for many years, I think since the beginning, 2006. Danielle came into the office. As we always say, she doesn't just get you a mortgage, she gets you a mortgage plan. And that's what we're after. We actually receive the plan, and then we work out how to move you forward. And, you know, it all starts with what you want. We could tell you, Alex and Maria that just bought the place in Evergreen, Tim, they came to us, they wanted to buy a townhouse first. And then we showed them the values on different properties, and now they're buying their dream home first, and then we'll move on to rental properties. And the funny thing with them is we're only refinancing the current home up to a point where we know the rents will cover those costs, so they're not changing their lifestyle. They can still travel to Europe every year and continue driving a BMW, I guess. We're not changing their lifestyle, we're just enhancing it. And it takes Danielle doing that planning, Tim, to make sure all that comes together. So if you want to increase your lifestyle or have a better lifestyle like this couple, you can definitely do it.
Okay, Danielle, I don't know if you're still there. There's one more question. We'll take one more question for Danielle. After that, it should be for us. Is there any strategies that would work well with a HELOC?
Yeah, so this again comes down to very similar to the conversation about variable versus fixed. Everybody loves the idea of a HELOC, but when you have a HELOC on a property, how the lenders calculate your qualifying for the next property is very different. So even though you might make interest-only payments on a HELOC, a lot of the lenders take the limit of the HELOC, not what you owe, calculate it at a posted higher interest rate and put it over 25 years to say, okay, this is a payment that you have to use to qualify to buy your next property. So HELOCs can be advantageous, but they can also actually hinder what we can do. So that's, again, part of the conversation where every property and every client is different. If we have the extra qualifying room, then a HELOC could be great. If we're doing a flip, then a HELOC is a great option. So there's always different situations. It's a great tool to use. It's a great tool to use for the Smith maneuver. Like there's lots that you can do with a HELOC, but you have to weigh it out with qualifying as well. If your goal is to accumulate 4 or 5 properties and a HELOC is going to impede on that, well, then maybe we'll look at a mortgage. So it's very specific to each client, but yes, absolutely. We utilize HELOCs for different reasons for sure.
Okay, thanks, Danielle.